Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. This is the second half of Chapter 13 of the Inimitable Jeeves, a collection of short stories written by P.G. Wodehouse in 1923. In them, Jeeves, a valet, and his employer Bertie Wooster are all characters in dozens of little vignettes. The stories are all told from the point of view of Bertie. When we left off, all were in the midst of setting up a betting pool based on sermon links in the surrounding hamlets. Odds have collapsed on the favorite of Bertie and his friends after others discovered he was a ringer. They have a plan B. Jeeves has declined to get involved. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Directly I'd got up, I went to the phone, snatched Eustace away from his morning's work, and instructed him to put a tenner on the Twing Flyer at current odds for each of the syndicate. After lunch, Eustace rang me up to say he'd done business at a snappy 7-1. The odds having lengthened owing to a rumor in knowledgeable circles that the Reverend Happenstall was subject to hay fever and was taking big chances strolling in the paddock behind the vicarage in the early mornings. And it was dashed lucky, I thought, next day that we managed to get the money on in time, for on the Sunday morning old Heppenstall fairly took the bit between his teeth and gave us 36 solid minutes on certain popular superstitions. I was sitting next to Steggles in the pew, and I saw him blench visibly. He was a little rat-faced fellow with shifty eyes and a suspicious nature. The first thing he did when we emerged into the open air was to announce formally that anyone who fancied the Reverend could now be accommodated at 15-8, and he added in a rather nasty manner that if he had his way, this sort of in-and-out running would be brought to the attention of the Jockey Club, but he supposed there was nothing to be done about it. This ruinous price checked the punters at once, and there was little money in sight. And so matters stood till just after lunch on Tuesday afternoon, when, as I was strolling up and down in front of the house with a cigarette, Claude and Eustace came bursting up the drive on bicycles dripping with momentous news. "Bertie," said Claude, deeply agitated, "unless we take immediate action and do a bit of quick thinking, we're in the cart." "What's the matter?" "G. Hayward's the matter," said Eustace morosely, "the Lord Bingley starter." "We never even considered him," said Claude. "Somehow or other, he got overlooked. It's always the same. Steggles overlooked him. We all overlooked him. But Eustace and I happened by the merest fluke to be riding through Lord Bingley this morning. There was a wedding on at the church, and it suddenly struck us it wouldn't be a bad move to get a line on G. Hayward's form, in case he might be a dark horse." "And it was jolly lucky we did," said Eustace. "He delivered an address of 26 minutes by Claude's stopwatch. At a village wedding, mark you. What'll he do when he really extends himself?" "There's only one thing to be done, Bertie," said Claude. "You must spring more funds so that we can hedge on Hayward and save ourselves." "But it's the only way out." "But I say, I hate the idea of all that money we put on Heppenstall being chucked away." "What else do you suggest? You don't suppose the Reverend can give this absolutely marvel a handicap and win, do you?" "Well, I've got it," I said. "What?" "I see a way by which we can make it safe for a nominee. I'll pop over this afternoon and ask him as a personal favor to preach that sermon of his on brotherly love on Sunday." Claude and Eustace looked at each other like those chappies in the poem with a wild surmise. "It's a scheme," said Claude. "A jolly brainy scheme," said Eustace. "Well, I didn't think you had it in you, Bertie." "But even so," said Claude, "fizzer as that sermon no doubt is, will it be good enough in the face of a 4-minute handicap?" "Oh, rather," I said. "When I told you it lasted 45 minutes, I was probably understating it. I should call it, from my recollection of the thing, near 50. "Oh, then carry on," said Claude. I toddled over in the evening and fixed the thing up. Old Heppenstall was most decent about the whole affair. He seemed pleased and touched that I should have remembered the sermon all these years, and said he had once or twice had an idea of preaching it again, only it had seemed to him on reflection that it was perhaps a trifle long for a rustic congregation. "And in these restless times, my dear Wooster," he said, "I fear that brevity in the pulpit is becoming more and more desiderated by even the bucolic churchgoer, who one might have supposed would be less afflicted with the spirit of hurry and impatience than his metropolitan brother. I have had many arguments on the subject with my nephew, young Bates, who is taking my old friend Speticue's cure over at Gandle by the Hill. His view is that a sermon nowadays should be a bright, brisk, straight-from-the-shoulder address, never lasting more than 10 or 12 minutes. "Long?" I said. "Well, my goodness, you don't call that brotherly love sermon of yours long, do you?" "It takes fully 50 minutes to deliver." "Surely not." "Your incredulity, my dear Wooster, is extremely flattering, far more flattering, of course, than I deserve. Nevertheless, the facts are as I have stated. You are sure that I would not be well advised to make certain excisions and eliminations? You do not think it would be a good thing to cut, to prune? I might, for example, delete the rather exhaustive excursus into the family life of the early Assyrians." "Oh, don't touch a word of it, or you'll spoil the whole thing," I said earnestly. "I am delighted to hear you say so. I shall preach the sermon without fail next Sunday morning." What I have always said, and what I always shall say, is that this anti-post betting is a mistake, an error, and a mug's game. You can never tell what's going to happen. If fellows would only stick to the old SP, there'd be fewer young people go wrong. I'd hardly finished my breakfast on the Saturday morning when Jeeves came to my bedside to say that Eustace wanted me on the telephone. "Good Lord, Jeeves, what's the matter, do you think?" "Oh, I'm bound to say I'm beginning to get a bit jumpy by this time." "Mr. Eustace did not confide in me, sir." "Has he got the wind up?" Somewhat vertically, sir, to judge by his voice." "Do you know what I think, Jeeves? Something's gone wrong with the favourite." "Which is the favourite, sir?" "Mr. Heppenstall. We've gone to odds on. He was intending to preach a sermon on brotherly love which would have brought him home by lengths. I wonder if anything's happened to him." "You could ascertain, sir, by speaking to Mr. Eustace on the telephone. He is holding the wire." "Oh, by Jove, yes." I shoved on a dressing gown and flew downstairs like a mighty rushing wind. The moment I heard Eustace's voice, I knew we were in for it. It had a croak of agony in it. "Bertie." "Here I am." "Oh, deuce of a time you've been. Bertie, we're sunk. The favourite's blown up." "No." "Yes, coughing in his stable all last night." "What?" "Absolutely. Hay fever." "Oh, my sainted aunt." "The doctor is with him now, and it's only a question of minutes before he's officially scratched. That means the curate will show up at the post instead, and he's no good at all. He's being offered at 100 to 6, but no takers. What shall we do?" I had to grapple with the thing for a moment in silence. "Eustace?" "Hello?" "What can you get on G. Hayward?" "Well, only 4-1 now. I think there's been a leak and Steggles has heard something. The odds shortened late last night in a significant manner." "Well, 4-1 will clear us. Put another $5 all round on G. Hayward for the syndicate. That'll bring us out on the right side of the ledger." "If he wins." "What do you mean? I thought you considered him a cert, bar Heppenstall." "I'm beginning to wonder," said Eustace gloomily, "if there's such a thing as a cert in this world. I'm told the Reverend Joseph Tucker did an extraordinarily fine trial gallop at a mothers' meeting over at Badgwick yesterday. However, this seems our only chance. So long." Not being one of the official stewards, I had my choice of churches the next morning, and naturally I didn't hesitate. The only drawback to going to Lower Bingley was that it was 10 miles away, which meant an early start, but I borrowed a bicycle from one of the grooms and tooled off. I had only Eustace's word for it that G. Hayward was such a stayer, and it might have been that he had showed too flattering form at that wedding where the twins had heard him preach, but any misgivings I might have had disappeared the moment he got into the pulpit. Eustace had been right. The man was a trier. He was a tall, rangy-looking graybeard, and we went off from the start with a nice, easy action, pausing and clearing his throat at the end of each sentence, and it wasn't 5 minutes before I realized here was the winner. His habit of stopping dead and looking round the church at intervals was worth minutes to us, and In the home stretch, we gained no little advantage owing to his dropping his pince-nez and having to grope around for them. 20-minute mark, he had merely settled down. 25 minutes saw him going strong. And when he finally finished with a good burst, the clock showed 35 minutes, 14 seconds. With the handicap which he had been given, this seemed to me to make the event easy for him, and it was with much bonhomie and goodwill to all men that I hopped onto the old bike and started back to the hall for lunch. Bingo was talking on the phone when I arrived. "Fine, splendid, topping," he was saying. "Eh? Oh, we needn't worry about him. Righto, I'll tell Bertie." He hung up the receiver and caught sight of me. "Oh, hello, Bertie. I was just talking to Eustace. It's all right, old man. The report from Laura Bingley has just got in. J. Hayward romps home." "I knew he would. I've just come from there." "Oh, were you there? I went to Badgwick. Tucker ran a splendid race, but the handicap was too much for him. Starkey had a sore throat and was nowhere, and Roberts, a fail by the water, ran third. Good old G. Haywards," said Bingo affectionately, and we strolled out onto the terrace. "Are all the returns in, then?" I asked. "All except Gandil by the Hill, but we needn't worry about Bates. He never had a chance. By the way, poor old Jeeves loses his tenner. Silly ass." "Jeeves? How do you mean?" "He came to me this morning, just after you'd left, and asked me to put a tenner on Bates for him. I told him he was a chump and begged him not to throw his money away, but he would do it." Jeeves materialized from nowhere and was standing by my elbow. "I beg your pardon, sir. This note arrived for you just after you had left the house this morning." "Eh? What note?" "The Reverend Mr. Heppenstall's butler brought it over from the vicarage, sir. It came too late to be delivered to you at the moment." Young Bingo was talking to Jeeves like a father on the subject of betting against the form book, and the yell I gave made him bite his tongue in the midst of the sentence. "What the dickens is the matter?" he asked, not a little peeved. "We're dished. Listen to this." I read him the note. "The vicarage, Twing Gloss. My dear Wooster, as you may have heard, circumstances over which I have no control will prevent my preaching the sermon on brotherly love for which you made such a flattering request. I am unwilling, however, that you shall be disappointed, so if you will attend divine service at Gandil by the Hill this morning, you will hear my sermon preached by young Bates, my nephew. I have lent him the manuscript at his urgent desire, for between ourselves there are wheels within wheels. My nephew is one of the candidates for the headmastership of a well-known public school, and the choice has been narrowed down between him and one rival. Late yesterday afternoon, James received private information that the head of the board of governors of the school proposed to sit under him this Sunday in order to judge of the merits of his preaching, a most important item in swaying the board's choice. I acceded to his plea that I lend him my sermon on brotherly love, of which, like you, he apparently retains a vivid recollection. It would have been too late for him to compose a sermon of suitable length in place of the brief address which, mistakenly, in my opinion, he had designed to deliver to his rustic flock, and I wish to help the boy. Trusting that his preaching of the sermon will supply you with as pleasant memories as you say you have of mine, I remain, cordially yours, F. Heppenstall. P.S. The hay fever has rendered my eyes unpleasantly weak for the time being, so I'm dictating this letter to my butler, Brookfield, who will convey it to you. I don't know when I've experienced a more massive silence than the one that followed my reading of this cheery epistle. Young Bingo gulped once or twice, and practically every known emotion came and went on his face. Jeeves coughed one soft, low, gentle cough, like a sheep with a blade of grass stuck in its throat, and then stood gazing serenely at the landscape. Finally, young Bingo spoke. "Great Scott," he whispered hoarsely. "An SP job." "I believe that is the technical term, sir," said Jeeves. "So you had inside information, dash it," said young Bingo. "Why, yes, sir," said Jeeves. "Brookfield happened to mention the contents of the note to me when he brought it earlier. We are old friends." Bingo registered grief, anguish, rage, despair, and resentment. "Oh, well, all I can say," he cried, "is it's a bit thick. Preaching another man's sermon. Do you call that honest? Do you call that playing the game?" Well, my dear old thing, I said, to be fair, it's quite within the rules. Clergymen do it all the time. They aren't expected always to make up the sermons they preach. Jeeves coughed again and fixed me with an expressionless eye. And in the present case, sir, if I may be permitted to take the liberty of making the observation, I think we should make allowances. We should remember that the securing of this headmastership meant everything to the young couple. Young couple? What young couple? The Reverend James Bates, sir, and Lady Cynthia. I'm informed by her ladyship's maid that they had been engaged to be married for some weeks, provisionally, so to speak, and his lordship made his consent conditional on Mr. Bates securing a very important and remunerative position. Young Bingo turned a light green. Engaged to be married? Yes, sir. There was silence. I think I'll go for a walk, said Bingo. But my dear thing, I said, it's just lunchtime. The gong will be going any minute now. I don't want any lunch, said Bingo. End of chapter. Poor Bingo. He's lost his money and lost his latest true love. But he'll find more. And lucky Jeeves, it seems. Stay tuned for the next episode in this series, Chapter 14, The Purity of the Turf, when we're off to the races, the horse races. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com, and remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.